There is a moment, and if you have ever experienced it, you know exactly what I am talking about. When a man looks at you differently, not the way a boy looks at something shiny and new, not the way someone gazes at a passing distraction, but deeply, steadily, with a kind of quiet reverence that has absolutely nothing to do with novelty and everything to do with something far more profound. And in that moment, he says something, just a few words, simple words perhaps, words you might have even heard before in other contexts, from other people. But from him, in that moment, they land differently. They carry weight. They carry truth. They carry the unmistakable signature of a man who has crossed over from interest into something undeniable, irreversible, and completely, totally real. Welcome to the Heart Code. Today, we are going to decode something that women over 40, over 50, and beyond have been quietly wondering about for years. We are going to talk about the specific words, the actual phrases that men use when they are not just attracted to an older woman, but when they have genuinely, deeply, completely fallen in love with her. Because here is what most relationship advice gets wrong. It tells you to watch what a man does, and yes, actions matter enormously, but words matter too. The right words spoken at the right time, in the right emotional context, are not just communication, they are confession. They are revelation. They are the moment a man's carefully constructed emotional armor cracks open just enough to let you see what is burning inside. And what burns inside a man who loves a mature woman is unlike anything else in the emotional landscape of human connection. So stay with me. We are going to go deep today. We are going to go long, and by the time we are finished, you will have a completely new vocabulary for understanding exactly where a man stands with you. Not through guesswork, not through anxiety, not through endless analysis with your girlfriends at 2 in the morning, but through clear, grounded, evidence-based emotional intelligence. This is going to change how you hear the men in your life. It might even change how you feel about yourself. Let us begin. Before we dive into the 13 words, and I promise you, every single one of them is going to resonate somewhere deep in your chest, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, not as a content creator talking to an audience, but as someone who genuinely believes that the women watching this channel are among the most remarkable, most resilient, most emotionally sophisticated people on the planet. You are not a girl navigating her first heartbreak. You are not a 20-something trying to figure out who she is. You are a woman who has lived, who has loved, who has perhaps lost, who has rebuilt, who carries both scars and wisdom in the same body, sometimes in the same breath. And because of all of that, because of every single experience that brought you to exactly this moment, sitting here watching this video, you deserve love that matches your depth. Love that does not flinch at your complexity. Love that does not ask you to be smaller, softer, or simpler than you actually are. And men who are worthy of you, they know this, they feel it. And when they feel it, they say things, specific things, things that betray the full weight of what is happening inside them, whether they intend to reveal themselves or not. That is what today is about. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been in a relationship, or are currently in one, where you found yourself wondering whether what he feels is real, whether what he says means what you hope it means, whether you are reading the situation correctly or just projecting your own desire onto his words, please write that in the comments right now. Tell me your story. Tell me what you are going through. Tell me what brought you here today. Because this community, the community of the Heart Code, is built on real conversations, real experiences, and real women sharing real truths with one another. Your comment might be the thing that someone else needs to read tonight. Your story might be the lifeline someone else is looking for. And if this video speaks to you, if somewhere in these words you find something that clicks, something that feels like finally, someone is saying what I have been trying to understand, please like this video. That small gesture tells us that this content matters, that it is reaching the right people, and that we should keep going deeper. Share it with a friend who needs to hear this. Subscribe to the Heart Code so you never miss a conversation like this one. And if you want to truly support the work we are doing here, if you want to help us keep creating content that goes this deep, this honestly, into the emotional lives of mature women, please consider supporting the channel with super thanks. Every single contribution is seen, is felt, and goes directly into making this channel better, richer, and more impactful. All right, let us get into it. Word number 1. Finally. There is a word that men who love older women say that almost no one talks about. It is not a romantic word on the surface. It is not a word that gets written in love songs or carved into tree trunks. But when a man who has spent years navigating the emotional landscape of relationships, particularly relationships with women who were not ready for what he needed, when that man meets you, when he truly meets you, the word that escapes him most naturally, most involuntarily, is this one. Finally. Finally. He says it in so many different ways. He says, say, I feel like I can finally talk to someone who actually gets it. He says, I have finally met someone who is not playing games. He says, this finally feels like what I thought love was supposed to feel like. He says, I can finally be honest without worrying about the reaction. Do you hear what is underneath all of those sentences? Do you hear the long exhale in that word, the relief? The bone-deep, years in the making relief of a man who has been searching for something and has, against all the odds he had begun to accept, actually found it. Here is the psychology behind this. Men, particularly as they mature, and I am talking about men in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, develop what psychologists sometimes call emotional fatigue around romantic disappointment. They have had relationships that looked promising and fell apart. They have invested in connections that turned out to be superficial. They have tried to have real conversations with women who were not equipped to have them. Not because those women were bad people, but because they had not yet done the internal work, the growing, the deepening that comes with lived experience. And so these men begin to quietly, almost unconsciously, lower their expectations. They stop hoping for depth. They stop hoping for someone who will challenge them intellectually, while also seeing them tenderly. They make peace with a version of love that is comfortable but not electric, companionable but not transformational. And then they meet you, and everything they had quietly given up on comes flooding back, not as hope this time. Hope is fragile. A hope can be disappointed, but as recognition, as reality, as something already happening that they did not have to wish for because it is just there, right in front of them, undeniable and extraordinary. That is when the word finally appears. And when a man says it to you, like in any of its forms, direct or indirect, casual or emotional, what he is really saying is this: I had forgotten this was possible. I had made peace with never having it. And now that I have found it, in you, I am undone. This is not casual attraction. This is not the language of a man who is seeing where things go. This is the language of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not dare expect to arrive. And the location he has arrived at is you. Pay attention to how often he uses the word finally. Pay attention to the sigh that comes with it. Pay attention to the way his shoulders seem to drop a fraction, the way his voice loses its performance quality and becomes just voice, just him, just real, just honest. That is love. That is a man who loves a mature woman, recognizing, maybe for the first time in his life, that he has found what he did not know he was still looking for. And if you want to understand what to do with that, if you want to know how to receive that kind of love, without either running from it or gripping it so tightly it bruises, stay with me, because that is part of what we are building toward in this video. Word number 2, real. The second word that men say when they love an older woman is the word real. And again, like finally, it shows up in so many different constructions that you might miss it if you are not listening for it. He says, "You are the most real person I have ever been with." He says, "This feels real in a way that I cannot explain." He says, "I have never had a real conversation like this with anyone." He says, "You make me want to be real." Real. Now, why does a man say this word specifically to an older woman? Why is this not something he says equally to someone in her 20s or early 30s? Because authenticity, true authenticity, is earned. It is not a personality trait that someone is born with and simply displays. Authentic selfhood, the kind that comes through in how you speak, how you hold your opinions, how you respond to difficulty, how you love, is forged over time. It is hammered out on the anvil of experience. And the experiences that most powerfully forge authentic selfhood are the hard ones. Grief, failure, heartbreak, rebuilding. So the kind of experiences that crack the performance open and force you to confront who you actually are underneath all the roles you have been playing. By the time a woman is in her 40s or 50s, if she has done even a fraction of the inner work that her experiences have invited her to do, she radiates something that men feel in their bones before they can name it. She radiates realness. She does not pretend to be unbothered when she is bothered. She does not perform happiness she does not feel. She does not agree with things she disagrees with just to avoid conflict. She does not shapeshift herself into whatever she thinks will make the man in front of her comfortable. She is simply, sometimes uncomfortably, powerfully herself. And for a man who has spent time in relationships with women who were still constructing their identities, still performing their way through the world, still figuring out what they actually believe and want and need, encountering that kind of authenticity is like walking out of a room full of artificial light into actual sunlight. The difference is not subtle, it is everything. When he says the word real, he is describing what he feels in her presence. He is describing a quality in the relationship that he has perhaps never experienced before. He is saying, "I do not have to decode you. I do not have to wonder what is underneath the performance, because what I see is the real thing." And that gift of realness is something he cannot find everywhere. He can find it here, with you. There is also something else embedded in that word. When he says, "This feels real," he is also talking about himself. Because the astonishing thing about being in the presence of a genuinely authentic person is that their authenticity gives you permission to be authentic too. When you are not performing, he does not have to perform. When you are not pretending, he does not have to pretend. When you bring all of yourself to the relationship, including the parts that are complicated, the parts that carry history, the parts that are not conventionally appealing, you create a space in which he can bring all of himself too. And for a man, particularly one who has spent most of his life in environments that punish male emotional authenticity, workplaces, friendships, earlier relationships, that space is not just welcome, it is revolutionary. So when he says the word real, hear the full weight of it, hear the relief, hear the gratitude, hear the love. Word number 3, understand. The third word is understand, and its variations: understood, understanding, gets it, sees it, knows. A man who loves an older woman almost inevitably says something like this at some point: You actually understand me. Or, I have never felt this understood before. Or, it is different with you. You get things without me having to explain them. Or perhaps most powerfully, you understand parts of me that I have never been able to explain to anyone. Let us sit with that last one for a moment. You understand parts of me that I have never been able to explain to anyone. Think about what that means. Think about the interior life of a man, the fears, the disappointments, the contradictions, the private shames, the unnamed longings, the places where he has been broken and imperfectly healed. And think about how rarely that interior life gets truly witnessed by another person. Men are not in general socialized to be fluent in emotional language. They have not been given the vocabulary or the permission to fully express what is happening inside them. And so much of their inner life lives in the dark, inarticulate but present, shaping their behavior and their relationships from the shadows. And then there is you, a woman who has lived long enough to recognize the shapes of things, even when they cannot be named. A woman whose own life has given her an emotional lexicon that goes far beyond what words can hold. A woman who can sit with someone in the unspeakable parts of their experience and not flinch, not fix, not flee, but simply be present, witness, understand. The experience of being truly understood by someone is one of the most profound human experiences there is. Psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, spoke about the transformational power of being truly heard and understood. He said that when a person feels deeply understood, something in them shifts. They feel less alone, less afraid, more capable of growth, more open to love. This is not pop psychology. This is the documented, researched reality of what happens in human beings when they encounter genuine empathy. And older women, in general, are extraordinarily good empaths. Not because they were born that way, though some certainly have a natural gift, but because their lives have taught them to be. They have been through enough to understand struggle. They have loved enough to understand longing. They have lost enough to understand grief. They have rebuilt enough to understand resilience. And all of that comes through in how they listen, how they respond, how they hold space for another person's experience without making it about themselves. A man who has found this kind of understanding in a woman does not let it go easily. He knows, whether consciously or not, that what he has found is rare, and the word understand becomes his shorthand for the entire experience of being seen and known and held in a way that feels both impossible and true. When you hear him use this word, when he tells you that you understand him, that you get him, that you see him in ways no one else has, believe it. That is not flattery, that is testimony. Word number 4, safe. We are moving now to a word that might surprise you, because it is not a word we typically associate with masculine romantic expression. And yet, it is one of the most consistent, most telling words that men use when they describe what it is like to be in love with a mature woman. That word is safe. He says, I feel safe with you. He says, you are the first person I have ever felt completely safe being honest with. He says, there is something about you that makes me feel like I do not have to be careful. He says, I feel safe falling in love with you. Safety. In romantic love, coming from a man. This might sound strange at first. We are not used to thinking about men as beings who need to feel safe in order to love fully. Our cultural narrative tends to position men as the protectors, the providers, the ones who create safety for others. But the emotional reality is far more nuanced than that. And women who have lived long enough have usually had at least a glimpse of it. Men need emotional safety just as much as women do. Perhaps more in some cases, precisely because they have been so thoroughly denied permission to seek it. Emotional safety in the context of romantic love means something very specific. It means I can be vulnerable here and not be punished for it. I can be imperfect here and not be judged for it. I can be honest here, truly, sometimes painfully honest, and not be abandoned for it. I can show the parts of myself that I usually hide, the parts that are scared or sad or uncertain or broken, and not be met with contempt, dismissal, or manipulation. That kind of safety is extraordinarily rare, and it is extraordinarily rare because creating it requires a specific combination of qualities: emotional maturity, genuine empathy, personal security, and an absence of the kind of reactive defensiveness that so often characterizes people who have not yet done their inner work. Mature women in general bring these qualities in abundance, not because they are better than younger women. They are not in any absolute sense, but because they have had time to understand their own triggers, time to develop the capacity to respond rather than react, but time to build the kind of internal security that allows them to be present for another person without making that person responsible for managing their own emotions. When a man tells you that he feels safe with you, he is giving you something extraordinarily precious. He is giving you the deepest possible report on his interior experience of the relationship. He is saying, with you, I do not have to be armored. With you, I can lay down the performance. With you, I can be human, fully, messily, imperfectly human, and trust that I will still be loved. If you ever doubted whether what he feels is real, whether it runs deep enough to last, whether it is something you can actually build a life on, the presence of that word, safe, should dissolve that doubt. Men do not use that word casually. They barely use it at all, in most cases. When they use it with you, they are confessing everything. Word number 5, different. Here is a word that gets used in romance so often that it has almost lost its meaning. How many men have said, "You are different," to how many women across how many centuries of human romantic history? It sounds almost like a line. It sounds almost like something you say when you are trying to impress someone. And yet, and this is crucial, when a man who loves a mature woman says this word, it carries an entirely different freight. It is not a line. It is an observation, a genuine, sometimes bewildered observation about something he is experiencing that he genuinely cannot account for in any framework he previously had. He says, "You are different from anyone I have ever met." He says, "This relationship is different." He says, "The way I feel about you is different from anything I have felt before." He says, "I am different when I am with you." That last one is the key. I am different when I am with you. Because that is the thing about loving a mature woman. She does not just change how you feel about love. She changes how you feel about yourself. She reflects back to you a version of yourself that is more honest, more grounded, more capable of depth than the version you walk around in every day. And encountering that version of yourself through the mirror of her presence is profoundly disorienting. It is also profoundly beautiful. It is also, in the truest sense, transformational. There is a concept in psychology sometimes called the Michelangelo phenomenon, named after the sculptor who said he did not create his statues. He simply removed the excess marble to reveal the figure that was already there. The Michelangelo phenomenon in relationships refers to the way certain partners bring out, over time, the person's ideal self, not by pushing or demanding or manipulating, but simply by seeing and reflecting and appreciating, not the performed self, not the armored self, the actual self, the self that was always there, waiting to be recognized. Older women do this naturally. They do not need you to be more than you are. They do not project fantasies onto you. They see you, actually see you, and they respond to what they see with genuine appreciation, genuine curiosity, genuine love, and being truly seen, may perhaps for the first time in your life, is a profoundly altering experience. So when he says, "You are different," when he says, "This is different," what he means on the deepest level is, "You have shown me a version of love and of myself that I did not know existed. And now that I know it exists, I cannot go back to what came before." That is not a line, that is a man in love. Word number 6, stay. There is a word that men who love older women use that is perhaps the most revealing of all the words on this list, and it is the smallest. 1 syllable, 4 letters, and yet it contains an entire universe of longing and love and need. That word is stay. He says, "Stay, just for a little while longer." He says, "Stay, I am not ready for this to end." He says, "I just want you to stay." He says, "Whatever happens, please stay." Now, in the context of a single evening, in the context of a date that has gone beautifully, a conversation that has flowed for hours without either person wanting it to stop. Stay is simply a man asking you not to go home yet. But in the larger context of a relationship, in the emotional texture of how he relates to you over time, stay is something much more significant. It is his most unguarded admission that he is afraid of losing you, that the thought of you not being in his life is genuinely painful to him, that your presence is not just enjoyable, it is necessary. Men, as a general rule, do not ask people to stay, not in that naked, undefended way. They say goodbye, they play it cool, they let you go and then send a casual text later. The social scripts available to men, particularly around romantic vulnerability, almost never include the word stay said sincerely, with the full weight of what it means behind it. To say stay is to reveal that you need someone, to reveal that you have become important enough to someone, that their departure causes something in you that you cannot manage without showing it. And with a mature woman, men find themselves saying this word, because what they have found in her is not something they can easily replace or replicate. It is not a commodity experience, interchangeable with the next date or the next relationship. It is specific, it is rare, it is her, and the thought of her walking out the door, tonight or ever, triggers something in them that they cannot hide behind their usual emotional composure. When he asks you to stay, believe the asking, believe the weight behind it. He is not just asking for more time. He is telling you that you have become, in the most real and irreplaceable sense, home. Word number 7, honest. The 7th word is honest, and I want to explore this one very carefully because it shows up in a way that is sometimes confusing. When a man who loves an older woman uses the word honest, when he says things like, "I want to be completely honest with you," or "honestly, I have never felt this way about anyone," or "honestly, you terrify me," or "I can be honest with you in a way I cannot be with anyone else." What he is doing is something extraordinarily vulnerable. He is flagging that what he is about to say is real, that he is taking off the performance, that he is choosing in this moment not to manage your impression of him, but to simply tell you the truth. And that choice, that decision to be honest rather than strategic, is one of the most intimate things a person can do in a relationship. Here is why this word appears so specifically in the context of loving an older woman. Younger women, through no fault of their own, often receive dishonesty, not necessarily malicious dishonesty, not lying in the sense of fabricating stories, but dishonesty of omission, dishonesty of performance, dishonesty of telling someone what they seem to want to hear rather than what is actually true. Men learn, often from early experience, that expressing certain emotions honestly tends to get a reaction they do not know how to handle. Expressing fear gets dismissal. Expressing uncertainty gets anxiety from the other person. Expressing the depth of their feelings gets a kind of destabilizing intensity that sends things sideways, and so they learn to be careful. They learn to manage information. They learn to be, in a word, dishonest about what is happening inside them. And then they meet an older woman, and something in her presence, her groundedness, her non-reactivity, the way she receives difficulty without catastrophizing, the way she holds emotions, real, complex, adult emotions, without flinching, tells them, at a level below conscious thought, that honesty might actually be safe here, that they might actually be able to say the true thing. And something unlocks in them, and they reach for the word honest as a marker, a signal, a small announcement that something different is happening, something real. So when he prefaces what he says with honestly, when he uses the word not as a filler but as a genuine indicator that he is about to show you something private, pay attention to what comes after it, because what comes after it is usually the truest thing he knows how to say. Word number 8, home. We have arrived at one of the most emotionally potent words on this list, and it is a word that you will hear in many different forms from a man who has fallen in love with a mature woman. He says, "Being with you feels like coming home." He says, "You feel like home to me." He says, "I have never felt at home anywhere in my life until now." He says, "I am home when I am with you." Home, not excitement, not adventure, not passion, though those things may also be present, but home. To understand why this word is so significant, you have to understand what home means at the deepest psychological level. Home is not a place. Home is a felt sense of belonging. It is the experience of arriving somewhere after a long journey and being able to exhale completely, let down your guard entirely, occupy your own skin fully without apology or performance. Home is where you are fully yourself. Home is where your presence is not provisional, where you do not have to earn your place or maintain your welcome. Home is unconditional. Home is where, no matter what has happened out in the world, you are simply received. Most men spend most of their lives without ever experiencing a person as home. They experience homes as places, as buildings, as geographic locations. But a person as home, a person whose presence gives you that feeling of complete, the unconditional belonging, that is rare, that is extraordinary. That is the thing that, once you have had it, you will do almost anything to hold on to. And mature women, again and again, create this experience in the men who love them, not through any kind of deliberate strategy, not through making themselves artificially accessible or artificially accepting, but through the natural warmth that comes from having lived enough to know that most people are doing their best, from having loved enough to know that love is an act of acceptance first, from having lost enough to know that belonging, true belonging, is not something you take for granted. When he calls you home, he is saying something that his entire emotional vocabulary has been building toward, perhaps for years. He is saying, "I am finally somewhere I can rest. I am finally somewhere I can be. I am finally somewhere that is mine, not because I built it or earned it or deserve it in some abstract sense, but because inexplicably, miraculously, it simply is. You are home." Word number 9, scared. Now we are getting into territory that might be the most surprising on this list, because we are talking about the word scared. Men who are deeply, genuinely in love with older women often say things like, "Honestly, you scare me," or "I am terrified of how much I feel for you," or "I have never been scared of losing someone before, but the thought of losing you genuinely frightens me," or simply, "I am scared of how real this is." Scared, terrified, frightened. Why, in the name of everything, is a man using words like this when what we are describing is love? And why is this specifically a sign of deep love rather than ambivalence or dysfunction? Because genuine deep love is genuinely deeply vulnerable, and genuine deep vulnerability is genuinely deeply frightening. The more you love someone, the more power they have to hurt you. The more you need someone, the more catastrophic the prospect of losing them becomes. The more someone becomes essential to your emotional life, the more the thought of their absence is not just sad, but destabilizing. And if you have lived long enough, if you have loved and lost and rebuilt, as most men reaching their 40s and beyond have done, you know this. You know from lived experience exactly how much it can hurt when someone who felt essential turns out not to be permanent. So when a man says to you, "You scare me," or "I am terrified of how I feel about you," what he is expressing is the full awareness of his own vulnerability. He is telling you, "I am in too deep to be protected. I am in too deep for the defenses that usually keep me safe. And I am in too deep by choice, not because I was ambushed, not because I was naive, but because what I have found with you is worth the terrifying risk of loving completely." There is enormous courage in that admission. Men culturally are almost never given permission to be frightened of love. Fear is supposed to be reserved for physical danger, for professional failure, for things that happen in the world. Emotional fear, the fear of loving and losing, the fear of needing someone and having them go, is considered unmasculine. And yet every honest man, every genuinely vulnerable man, feels it. And the fact that he is saying it to you, the fact that he trusts you enough to name the fear, is itself one of the deepest acts of intimacy available to him. When he says you scare him, receive it as the love it is. Receive the fear as the measure of what you mean to him. The depth of the fear is proportional to the depth of the feeling. If it did not matter so much, it would not be frightening. Word number 10, grateful. The 10th word might seem unexpected in this context too, but once I explain it, you will hear it everywhere. The word is grateful. He says, "I am so grateful you are in my life." He says, "I am grateful every day that I found you." He says, "I don't know what I would do without you, and I am honestly just so grateful." He says, "I am grateful to be loved by you." Grateful. Now, gratitude in love. What does it mean? Because there is a specific quality to the gratitude that men express toward older women that is different from the gratitude that shows up in other kinds of relationships. It is not the grateful you did something nice for me gratitude. It is not the transactional gratitude of someone who has received a favor. It is an existential gratitude, a gratitude that has to do not with what you have done, but with what you are and with the inexplicable grace of you being in his life. Here is where this comes from psychologically. Men who love mature women often have a clear-eyed awareness, again coming from their own lived experience, of exactly how unusual their relationship is. They know that the depth of emotional connection they have found is not standard issue. They know that the combination of passion and friendship, of desire and respect, of excitement and safety that a relationship with you provides, is something that does not come along every day, every year, or sometimes every decade. They know consciously or semi-consciously that what they have is extraordinary, and that awareness generates genuine, profound, existential gratitude. Psychologists who study love and adult attachment have consistently found that gratitude is one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction. Not passion. Passion fluctuates. Not compatibility. Compatibility can exist without depth. Gratitude. The felt sense that what you have is genuinely wonderful, that your partner is genuinely a gift, that the existence of this relationship in your life makes your life meaningfully better. When that feeling is present in a person, consistently and genuinely, the relationship has an anchor point that keeps it stable through all the inevitable storms. When he expresses gratitude to you, not as a courtesy, not as performance, but as something that surfaces from a place of genuine feeling. He is telling you that he knows what he has. He is telling you that he values it. He is telling you that he values you, not in spite of who you are, but completely, integrally because of it. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to be someone's answered prayer. And the word grateful, when he means it, is him telling you that you are exactly that. Word number 11, wait. This one might be the most unexpected word on the entire list. And when I explain it, I think it will open something up in you. The word is wait. He says, wait, I want to hear the rest of what you were saying. He says, wait, don't dismiss what you just said. That was important. He says, wait, I need you to know something before you go. He says, I will wait for you. He says, whatever you need to work through, I will wait. Wait. The word wait in the context of love is a word of absolute unconditional presence. It is a word that says, you matter more than my schedule, more than my agenda, more than whatever else I might be doing or thinking or planning. You are happening right now, in this moment, and nothing else is as important as this. With younger men, and I say this without judgment, only observation, there is often an impatience, a sense that things need to move at a certain pace, arrive at certain milestones in a certain time frame, they progress in a linear direction toward clearly defined endpoints, marriage, children, financial goals, social benchmarks. And when a relationship does not move at that pace, when a woman needs time, needs space, needs to work through something before she can fully arrive, younger men often struggle to wait. Not because they are cruel, but because they have not yet had the experience of knowing how rare and irreplaceable something truly extraordinary is. They have not yet learned that the things worth having are worth waiting for in any real, embodied, patient way. Mature men know this. Men who love older women know this. They know that she has a life, a full, complex, storied, rich life that existed long before he arrived in it, and that includes things that require her attention, her time, her energy. They know that she has children, perhaps, or a career or a past that still surfaces sometimes and needs processing, or simply her own independent personhood that she has worked too hard and too long to subordinate to anyone else's timeline. And they are willing to wait, not resentfully, not while issuing ultimatums, but genuinely freely, because what they are waiting for is worth the wait. When he tells you to wait, when he slows things down to make sure you are heard, to make sure you feel fully received, he is saying with his behavior what he may struggle to say in words. He is saying, you are not a transaction to be completed. You are not a goal to be achieved. You are a person to be known. And I have all the time in the world because what I am doing here with you is not on the way to something else. You are the something else. You are the destination. Word number 12, always. We are approaching the end of our 13 words, and this one is enormous. It is perhaps the most classically romantic word on the list, but even here there is a distinction in how it appears in the mouths of men who love mature women versus how it appears elsewhere. The word is always. He says, I will always choose you. He says, I will always be honest with you. He says, I have always known, somewhere deep down, that something like this existed. He says, I will always be grateful to have known you, no matter what happens. He says, I will always love you. Always. Now, always is a word that can be thrown around carelessly. Young love is full of always, full of promises made with genuine heart, but without the foundation of tested, proven commitment. We know this. We have all either made those promises or received them, And we know how quickly always can become for a while and then until. But when a mature man, a man who has lived long enough to know how hard always actually is, when that man says always, the word has a different density. It has been tested in the kiln of experience and come out not as casualty, but as conviction. He knows what he is saying. He knows the weight of that word because he has seen or lived through the dissolution of relationships that began with always. He knows that always requires choice, consistently, every single day, and he is making that choice. He is declaring that intention. He is telling you that the choice he is making is not provisional, not contingent on circumstances being favorable, not dependent on things going a certain way. There is something particularly moving about hearing always from a man who has weathered enough of life to mean it. Not a man who has not yet been tested, whose always is still theoretical, but a man whose history has broken open the naive version of that word and left him with something more honest, more careful, and therefore more true. When he says always, and he means it, and you know he means it, because you are old enough and wise enough to know the difference between the word said carelessly and the word said with the full weight of a life behind it. Receive it fully. Let it in. Do not deflect it. Do not diminish it. Do not decide in advance that it is too good to be true. Let the always land where it is aimed. Let it reach you. You have been waiting long enough. Always is exactly what you deserve. Our word number 13, you, and now we have arrived at the 13th word, the final word. And I have saved it for last because of all the words on this list, all the words we have explored. This is the one that, when you understand it fully, changes everything. The word is you, not a metaphor, not a complicated concept, not a psychological framework, just you. He says it in so many ways, and yet it is always, underneath all of its forms, the same word. He says, I think about you constantly. He says, I want to know everything about you. He says, I cannot imagine my future without you in it. He says, it is always you. He says, you are the reason. You. Here is what I want you to understand about this word, specifically in the context of love between a man and a mature woman. In lesser relationships, and in connections that are about chemistry without depth, or about companionship without genuine love, the other person is to some degree interchangeable. They fill a role, they meet a need, they provide a certain kind of company or a certain kind of comfort or a certain kind of stimulation. But if they were not there, someone else might fill that role. Someone else might meet that need. The person is, in a heartbreaking but honest sense, less than fully irreplaceable. When a man truly loves an older woman, she is irreplaceable. Not because he has made a decision to treat her as irreplaceable, not because loyalty has made him view her through a distorting lens, but because what she brings to his life, what she is, who she is, how she exists in the world, cannot be duplicated, cannot be replaced. It cannot be approximated by someone else. And so when he speaks about her, it is always with specificity. It is always with this quality of not someone like her, not a woman who has her qualities, her, specifically, completely, irreplaceably her, you. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about two fundamental modes of relationship. I-it, in which we relate to others as objects in our world, useful for certain purposes, interchangeable with other objects, and I-thou, in which we relate to another person as a genuinely unique, irreplaceable subject, as a thou rather than an it. Buber believed that the deepest human experiences, the most transformational, the most alive, the most real, happen in I-thou relationships. When we encounter the absolute uniqueness of another person and are genuinely moved by it. When a man who loves you uses the word you, truly uses it, with that quality of absolute specificity, of I would know you anywhere, of there is no one else on this earth like you. What he is doing, whether he knows it or not, is Buber's I thou. He is not relating to you as a role or a category or a function. He is relating to you as you, irreplaceable, incomparable, completely yourself. And he is telling you through the word that holds everything else, it is you. It has always been somehow you. There is nothing more loving than that. We have covered 13 words, 13 specific words that appear with remarkable consistency in the language of men who have fallen genuinely and deeply in love with older women. Let us bring them together, because together they tell a story that is larger than any single one of them. Finally, real, understand, safe, different, stay, honest, home, scared, grateful, wait, always, you. Do you hear the arc of that story? It begins with relief, finally someone real, someone I can understand and be understood by. It deepens into safety and difference. Something is happening here that is unlike anything I have experienced before, and it feels safe enough to fall into. It passes through the gate of honesty, and on the other side of that gate is home. And then comes the fear, because home is precious, and precious things can be lost, and that fear is the measure of the love. And the love generates gratitude, and gratitude generates patience. Wait, I will wait, however long is necessary. And out of all of that emerges commitment, always, aimed with complete specificity at one irreplaceable person, you. This is the emotional journey of a man who loves a mature woman. This is the interior architecture of his experience. And when you understand this arc, when you can hear these words not just as individual utterances, but as part of a continuous, coherent emotional story, you gain something enormously valuable. You gain the ability to know, not with your anxiety and not with your hope, but with your actual understanding where a man stands, what he feels, whether what is happening between you is something you can trust and build on, or something that needs more time, more attention, more honest conversation. Knowledge is not just power. In love, knowledge is kindness towards yourself, towards him, towards the relationship itself. A word directly to you. Before I close, I want to speak to something that I suspect many of you are carrying, something that lives just underneath the questions you bring to videos like this. Something that rarely gets named directly, but is almost always present in the hearts of women who have been around the sun enough times to know both the extraordinary beauty and the extraordinary difficulty of love. That thing is doubt. Not doubt about him, necessarily. Doubt about yourself. The quiet, persistent voice that says, are you worthy of being loved this completely? Are you certain enough in yourself to receive this kind of love without finding a reason to push it away? Are you willing to be as vulnerable as this kind of love requires after everything you have been through? I want to look that voice straight in the face and say something to it. It is lying to you. Your age is not a liability. Your history is not a burden. Your complexity is not a complication. Your scars are not deterrents. Every single one of those things, every year you have lived, every love you have lost, every night you rebuilt yourself from scratch, every morning you chose to try again. All of it is exactly what makes you extraordinary. All of it is exactly what makes you the woman that a certain kind of man has been quietly, perhaps unconsciously, waiting to find. You do not have to be younger. You do not have to be simpler. You do not have to pretend that your life started fresh yesterday. The woman you are, complicated, experienced, real, wise, sometimes weary, sometimes wounded, always deeper than anyone expects. She is precisely the woman who inspires the words we have talked about today. She is the woman who makes a man say finally, She is the woman who makes him say home. She is the woman who earns his most honest, most frightened, most grateful, most absolute always. Do not shrink from that. Do not talk yourself out of being deserving of it. Do not decide in advance that something is too good to be true simply because it is good. You are allowed to be loved completely. You have always been allowed to be loved completely. And the man who loves you will make sure with the words he chooses and the life he shows up to live with you that you know it. We have been on quite a journey today, haven't we? 13 words. 13 windows into the interior of a man who loves a mature woman. 13 ways of listening more deeply, more clearly, more wisely to the men in your life. I hope something in this video landed for you. I hope something shifted. I hope you leave this conversation with a slightly different way of hearing the people who care about you. With a slightly more generous, slightly more grounded, slightly more confident ear. Because you deserve to know when you are loved. You deserve to be able to receive that love clearly, without the static of doubt or the noise of insecurity drowning out the signal. If this video spoke to you today, if something here resonated or surprised you, or gave you language for something you have been feeling but could not quite name, please like this video right now. That small action matters more than you know. It tells us that this is valuable. It tells us to keep going deeper, to keep having the conversations that most channels are afraid to have. So please, if you found value here, give us that like. And then please share this video. Share it with a woman in your life who is navigating love and wondering whether what she is experiencing is real. Share it with someone who has been doubting herself, who has been second-guessing whether she is too much or not enough, or somehow past the point where extraordinary love is still possible. She needs to hear this. You might not know exactly who she is right now, but she is out there, and the right video at the right moment can genuinely change the direction of someone's life. Be the person who sends that to her. Please subscribe to the Heart Code if you have not already. We are building something here, not just a channel, but a community of women who are committed to understanding themselves and their relationships at the deepest possible level. Every video we make is made for you, with you in mind, trying to give you the clearest, most honest, most practically useful insight into the emotional realities of love and connection. Subscribe so that you never miss one. Every week there is something new here that I believe will serve you. And if you want to go even further, if you want to support this work in a tangible way, if you want to be part of making sure that we can keep creating content at this depth and this quality, please consider supporting the channel with super thanks. You will find the option right below this video. Every super thanks is seen, every single one is felt, and everyone goes directly into making this channel better and more impactful for every woman who finds her way here. Your support is not just financial, it is a vote. A vote for this kind of conversation. Be a vote for treating women's emotional lives with the seriousness and the depth they deserve. A vote for the Heart Code and everything it represents. And every vote matters. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me, which of these 13 words hit you hardest? Which one made you catch your breath? Which one describes something you have heard someone say to you or something you have been hoping to hear? Which one surprised you? Tell me everything. I read every comment. I mean that. I read every single one. And your stories, your questions, your insights, they shape what we make next. They tell me what you need, and what you need matters to me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting this space with your attention and your heart. You are not just a viewer. You are the reason this community exists. You are the reason these conversations happen. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, and you deserve every single word of love that is coming for you. This has been the Heart Code. I will see you in the next one. And until then, Be well, love yourself, and know that the most extraordinary chapter of your love story may not be behind you at all. It may be about to begin.